Good morning. Thanks for joining us today on my Dolby Atmos music creation webinar. My name is Ceri Thomas. I'm so glad to be back with you for 2022, and hope you all had great holiday periods. Today we're going to be talking about flexible Dolby Atmos music creation systems, and I'm going to do that by telling you about a little bit about where we've come from, and just bear with me as I go through this. Joked with the team before that's actually should be called "This is my truth, tell me yours," and so that's what I'm going to do right here. So, flexible systems. What does that mean for Dolby Atmos, and why is it important? Well, let's take a look back. So, as many of you know, Dolby Atmos came from the movie theaters. So back in 2012, we saw installations, well, probably 2011 realistically, of Dolby Atmos in large-scale movie theater-like dubbing stages. And that was for creation of the movie titles like Brave and Oblivion and Iron Man and various things that were coming out at that time. And the installs were big. They were huge. They were large format consoles, DFC, 3D consoles. They were Avid System 5s. They were, a whole bunch of things. They had multiple source machines. They had, on the stage that I became familiar with at Todd in Hollywood, there were 6 source machines, often 7. There was dialogue, there was music, effects 1, effects 2, background, Foley, and a special one. That was fed into a recorder, which was a Pro Tools system running 128 channels of MADI interfaces, or maybe even AES at that time. We had hundreds of auxiliaries on the sessions for recording metadata, sending metadata. It had to be on auxiliary for panning, which was slightly weird. A pan server. So we had a dedicated machine running pan information into those consoles. And it was a fairly large install of a 2U Supermicro, 4U Supermicro server with MADI I/O. That was basically, and still in many cases is, the status quo on those movie theater side of things. But as content has moved out of the movies, we go into smaller installations. So by 2014, we have a renderer that's capable of doing smaller channel counts, here representing a 714 on the Dolby Atmos monitor. And the method for working with had changed. So hundreds of auxiliaries for panning had been wiped out. We no longer had the pan server. Everything was communicating directly. The large format consoles had largely given way to control surfaces, 1 or 2 source machines for those Blu-ray distributions. And yes, there was probably a recorder, certainly if there was more than one system that was working. Now, that also relied on having a very tightly spec'd PC. In many cases, it was a Dell rendering unit, a 7910, later a 7920, with MADI interfaces. Reliability was the name of the game there, and that was pretty successful in being able to scale out into mechanisms like Netflix and various other distribution pathways. And then in 2016, partly, I joined the company in 2015 to do virtual reality. By 2016, we were looking at new, more flexible ways to scale that down even further. So we launched the production suite beta for virtual reality. At the time, it was actually only to headphones. Virtual reality was a largely headphone-based endeavor. So we created this production suite. I say we, the team in Barcelona and San Francisco and around the world, created this production suite that was going to enable single machine creation So it came with things like the send and return plugins that some of you may be familiar with, for sending out into our renderer and then returning back into Pro Tools. It was designed for VR workflows primarily, and then adapted for home theater. So the home theater market also needed more flexible solutions. And still, we were largely based around PC and MADI for the dedicated renderers. But Production Suite was the first installation to run on a Mac. It was the first side-loaded workstation implementation. The reason I bring up VR in this is, they were, those flexible solutions, and we continue to see these evolutions. So, for those of you maybe unfamiliar, at the time we also had a spherical panner, and one of the cool things about the spherical panner is how deeply it integrated the VR mentality. So 360 video was where the world was at that point for media production for virtual reality. So we'd have an equirectangular video that is represented by that equirectangular panner, and the object can do spherical panning, and they can go below you as well as above you. So lots of really interesting things that started to happen at that time. One of the most important was actually automatable binaural render modes. So for those of you that have played with the binaural renderers, and this is going to be a little familiar, but also a little unfamiliar. We used to be able to automate those. And so you could have a particular object that was near, became far, and also turned that off. So if you didn't want head tracking to be on for a particular object, you can turn head tracking off. And that made it head locked, which was a real powerful storytelling tool. It was enabling the creator to decide how their sound was going to be rendered in the headphones that their end user was going to be using. And this was across a wide variety of other mechanisms as well. So in VR, we had other companies such as Facebook 360, who bought 2 big ears. Varun and Abesh had spent time developing their head-locked and head-tracked sounds, or what we then called scene relative and head relative. And the ability to decide on the fly what was going to be sent into any one of those bundles, those buckets, was really important. Now, I'm bringing this back up now because we're 2022. We've got 5 years of experience behind us on that, and we can no longer automate binaural render modes. But binaural render modes are really important, and they actually enable you to control the rendering experience through Dolby through Dolby tools, and it can be really creative. So you might want to, for example, in a music environment, not have the drums head tracked. You may want to have them head locked. This was pretty common in the VR world. Same with the vocal. The vocal wanted to stay with the main body of the song. So we had this ability to control the pads or non-diegetic elements might be able to stay put. This is also true when it gets into podcasting, which was the other title that we have in this episode. So podcasting is largely narrative storytelling. There are many other avenues that it can be, but we are looking and seeing a lot of adoption of the creative tools in podcasting. And the reason those podcasters are adopting those tools, things like being able to control the story, immerse the listener, immerse the podcastee, maybe, in the story that's being told. So we'll see an awful lot more about these things. The situation was largely static then. So 2018 through 2020, we're based around a single renderer. Those of you that have seen these webinars will be very familiar with this workflow. The source workstation, whether that's locally hosted or on a secondary machine. You feed 128 channels of Dante, MADI, or via the Dolby Audio Bridge to the renderer. And it comes out speaker outputs into a processor, through a monitor control, and then some amplifiers, and into these extended options. This is basically the signal flow that has existed in the early adopter music studios. So Capitol Studios, Abbey Road, Blackbird, they were all based around this source with high channel count, Dante in many cases, into the renderer, out into the B chain, and into the rest of the chain there. And we were successful with that. So 2018, 2019, we had UMG launching a partnership with us, Warner Music launching a partnership, Amazon Music launching with the Echo Studio, and then Tidal, who were delivering AC4 IMS to these Android devices. So that binaural render mode, allowing the music creator to sculpt the listening experience. I traveled extensively during this time, and was in Germany the day that Tidal launched, and it was a huge impact in the conversations that we were having. And then 2020, and we all know 2020 was not the greatest year that we'd expected. There were no flying cars. There was nothing that was promised in those comic books many moons ago. We were working from home. We were not in these wonderful studios as many of us found. We were thinking about working in headphones. We were using remote collaboration. We were using binaural to get back and forth, using things like audio movers. And the installs in those studios became smaller footprints. So maybe lower cost speakers, lower configurations of channel count. What we saw in the music world was actually fairly consistent though. So we still see, and still saw at that point, people valuing the higher channel counts, the wide speakers, largely because when they were listening in their rooms, they knew that it was going to be a fairly accurate sound field when it went into headphones. So playing in a 914 room, creators found that actually they were more confident about placing sound into that wide part of the sound field. And then that was creating into the headphones. So we all got through 2020, and then in 2021, we continued to launch. We had launches around the world with Ungami, Naver Vibe, and then, as we all know, last June, Apple Music came on the line. Highly successful, very happy with everything that's gone on there. But what was powering it? Well, in January of 2021, at what would have been NAMM 2021, Avid launched this bundle of the Matrix Studio and an HDX1 system, which really inspired me to look at what might be possible with that. So we needed a solution that had more compact capabilities, more flexible I/O, maintained the lower cost, but also had the same complement of speaker configurations and headphones. So this is where the producer's pack that is shared in the Dolby Atmos box folder that many of you are familiar with, and I'm going to take you through some of it here, came from, was driven by a desire to help our creators follow their pathway in allowing them to tune their room, in allowing them to output more channels, to still maintain their DSP workflows, maybe their inputs for working with an artist, but also keep their costs low. So this is what the Producers Pack looked like. So we were able to take that HDX1 system and Matrix Studio, add a network switch, Mac Mini, and something like a Sonnet chassis, and for about 15K in hardware costs and another 10, 12 on speaker costs, you're able to get a 9.1.4 speaker setup that was going to enable you to match all of our best practices, but do so with the limit of 64 channels out of your workstation, your Pro Tools workstation, into the renderer. 64 channels because the Matrix Studio has 2 Digilink ports on it, a single HDX card and or a single HD native. And there were other options for this. So in the Producers Pack documentation, you'll find the Focusrite workflow, which was with a Red 16 line and a couple of Red 16 lines actually, and very similar workflow was enabled at that point. So this is one of those things that may not be officially supported, but it definitely works, and we've seen many producers set up with this. And the other thing that I really like about it is if you decide later on that you want to have 128 channels, you can add a second Matrix Studio. You can add more interfaces to that, and it will actually allow you to scale up. So the other thing that happened in 2021, the tail end, was Logic implemented. And they integrated the renderer into Logic Pro, which was huge. And so they're monitoring up to 7.1.4 and allowing all of the binaural render modes to be set as well, which is awesome. Like, you monitor in binaural, you can get everything that you want to put into that ADM-B wave. It's not without its limitations, and those are widely documented, but it's incredibly powerful. And those new integrations have meant that we have other opportunities for exploring what the workflow looks like. This is also not, to talk lightly about it, but it's been fueled by global supply chain shortages. Hardware manufacturers are struggling to get chipsets for their hardware. They're struggling to get enough shipping capabilities. Here in Los Angeles, we had a backlog of folks trying to come into the port of LA. It's been a problem for the industry worldwide. So these more flexible solutions have allowed us to say to people, well, yes, and here's how. Here's how you can do this. Now, would it be officially supported? Maybe not, but it certainly is something that can work. And what we've also seen is other speaker manufacturers. So we get a lot of questions about, lower cost speakers that can meet our specifications. Well, you saw the KRKs listed on that previous slide. Well, they're phenomenal. They fit into a great slot in the marketplace, and they do so incredibly well. They have good frequency response. They have high power outputs. They can mount to ceilings, and we've seen similar solutions from Cali Audio. So Charles and the team at Cali have developed a beautiful set of speakers that are low cost, high power, and good frequency response. And we've seen many others as well. So whether you're looking on the high end of integration, we have the continuing developments of ATCs and PMCs and Genelecs with their high performing speakers, and the Neumanns and various other things, or on the Cali Audio, KRK, IK Multimedia side of things. The marketplace, the music creator marketplace, is driving adoption of Dolby Atmos because they want to be able to have these flexible solutions. So what does it look like in 2022 for one of these systems in terms of overall costs? Well, if we're looking at the Mac and the PC side of things, we've got integrated renderer support for Nuendo, Blackmagic, Logic Pro on the Mac, Nuendo, Blackmagic on the PC. We've got integrated panning in Pro Tools on the Mac, Pro Tools and Pyramix on the PC. We have the wide variety of core audio interfaces on the Mac that will probably work, and ASIO on the PC side of things. And whether you want to stay with the traditional MADI, Dante connectivity, or work with some of the more generalized platforms, so it could be Dolby Audio Bridge in the box, and then out to a USB-C, a Thunderbolt device. There are many opportunities to do that, and we see the solutions in market from other manufacturers that we may not have talked about a lot in the past. So whether that's merging with the Horus unit and the Anubis, or Apogee with the Symphonies, and Antelope with the Goliath and the Galaxy, we're seeing a lot of solutions coming to market designed to support Dolby Atmos workflows, or at least high channel count. They may not say Dolby Atmos, but it's certainly high channel count. So you can see that with a little bit of engineering and ingenuity, you're probably able to get to a Dolby Atmos workflow with a little effort. So I just put this up and realized I made a mistake. So the integrated renderers don't support 914, they support 714. So I will change that. But the cost points here are all pulled from online retail pricing. So frankly, I went to Sweetwater, who just came online as one of our Dolby Atmos mastering suite resellers and service providers, and spec these out. So with a 14-inch MacBook, a Focusrite Scarlett interface, an ADAT converter to get us our extra 8 channels of analog out, and Logic Pro, you're looking at, well, there it says 3,800. Really, that's about 3,000 by the time you take those other 2 speakers off. Production suite, a Matrix Studio bundle with an extra Mac Mini and the Mac Mini to run it on, M1 at that point, and the production suite comes in at about $12,000. And then the mastering suite, you can get pricing down to about 16,000. So regardless of where you're wanting to start from, there's probably a flexible solution that you can create and sculpt with your reseller to get you working in Dolby Atmos. And we want to help you with that. We want to help answer the questions, and we've talked about it over and over, but the Music Studio onboarding form will help you to ensure that what you're working with your reseller on is getting you an answer that will be in line with our best practice guidelines to be then listed on Dolby.com. So that's the story of where we've been. I'm very happy to have been a part of it, and also to have been empowered to say maybe, or yes, and here's how, to so many of you. And wouldn't be able to do that without you driving the content, and also support from my manager Christine, and desire in the marketplace to create Dolby Atmos wherever you are. So thank you for being part of that. So if you want to know more about a flexible solution, Luke Ogier will take you through his setup at home in our Music Creation Series 101. Luke is in a system where he's got Focal speakers on the horizontal plane. He's got Genelec speakers overhead, and he's working with UA interfaces and various other things. So he'll be able to show you actually how this works in real life. So well worth checking out, and also checking out the headphone mixing series with Maggie Tobin. And a lot of other resources are out there, as you may know. So Mix with the Masters just had Josh Goodwin's session published. Had a lot of fun creating that with him, even though I couldn't talk that day, which some of you may value greater than the actual content. And then self-paced learning. Really exciting to see the learning expanding out from where we are currently to other partners as well. So look for more upcoming announcements, but we continue to see curriculum engagement from audio schools, from universities, wanting to integrate Dolby Atmos. And those resources are largely based off of the learning curriculum that the Dolby Institute put together here. If you want to figure out your own workflows, again, these workflow guidelines are available for download from our website, and certainly always happy to answer more questions. Somebody asked me recently, actually a very well-known mixer asked me recently, is there a forum I can participate in? And I went, yes, absolutely. So on professional.dolby.com or professionalsupport.dolby.com, you'll find a Dolby Atmos forum. And so feel free to ask any questions that you want in that. Of course, I'm definitely happy to answer them during the webinars also. But it's a resource that is manned by Dolby employees. It's used by used by the community, and we're growing that every single day. So definitely encourage you, if you've got questions, to seek that out, because the more we know about what you want to know, the more we can help you. And so definitely always eager to hear from you on that. Quick start guides and various things that are available for you as well, for resources. And if you're interested in studio enablement, if you are a label and want to know more about distributing, or in fact, if you're a creative, then we'd love to hear from you to answer your questions and to engage more deeply with you. So thanks for joining me here today, and I'm looking forward to all of your questions in the next section. If you want to download a free trial of the Dolby Atmos production suite, now at version 3.7.1, and I'd highly recommend you download the new binaural render plugin as well, the binaural settings plugin, which is now version 1.1.1. There's a good deal of workflow enhancements that you'll find in there. So definitely check that out. So there we go. Right, questions. Sam, it's always nice to see from yours and see your questions. So great to see you on here once again. What is the best point to position the voice in Dolby Atmos? I'm starting to lean on giving some guidance about actually being able to pull the vocal off of the center channel. So if you've got your center channel and you put the vocal directly in there, it's probably not going to be what the creative wants. If you pull it a little further forward, then it gives the voice a little more presence. It blends into the left wide into the front speakers as well, so you get a little divergence with it, and you can layer other things in behind it. So it's going to help you to maintain that presence, give a sense of immersion, and very keep it very pointed as well. So definitely not a one-stop solution on that. There's also many ways to look at that. And if you go through the series with Mix with the Masters, you'll hear from audio engineers who are doing this successfully on commercial products on a daily basis. Both Steve and Josh seem to prefer the phantom center option for the vocal. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but yeah, we're seeing some good success by just pulling that vocal off the front wall. When you do that, it's also very important, if you go back to my previous webinar in October, to disable the height button. So in the Pro Tools panel, there's a button that says height disable or height enable or something along those lines. It's two little arrows, one pointing up, one pointing down. By doing that, what you're going to do is control the sound field even more. So as you pull that off the front wall, it's not going to go up into the overhead. So you're not going to get the vocal starting to rise up. So definitely check that out. That tip comes to you courtesy of the wonderful Ryan Ulyate, who released Tom Petty's Wildflowers albums and a couple of subsequent releases in Dolby Atmos. So he shared that with me. Yes, there were many great many people in 2020 and 2021 preparing for longer at-home periods and building high-end studio spaces. So very much aware that it's not one size fits all on all of these. Who was the person using UA interfaces that you mentioned before, Steve Genowick? That was one of my fabulous colleagues, Luke Argeer. And Luke was Grammy nominated a couple of years ago for his immersive album with a band called Yacht, and he's been a great asset to learn from and test how real world mixers would operate with different constraints. So Luke Argeer. And you can find that video series at professional.dolby.com /music creation 101, if I recall correctly. Okay. As you stated, there's some limitations in Logic Pro for Atmos. It would be good to know more about them and what's needed to be added to the workflow in binaural. So the limitations, are they're very similar to kind of a number of the sort of first generation implementations that we see. So if you look on Pro Tools Expert, you'll see a pretty in-depth deep dive onto what those limitations are. But nothing is going to stop you from creating Atmos music content in Logic Pro. Got to be honest with you, it's the most fun I've had creating Atmos music content in a long time. So when I got the beta and I sat on the plane and I listened to this capability, it blew my mind that it was actually fun creating in Atmos again. But some of the more advanced things, multi-channel multi-beds are not possible. Logic's architecture is single surround output, and so the multiple bed configurations that you may find in post-production more than music is one of those set of limitations. Setting the down mix and trim controls for the 5.1 outputs in the renderer is not possible. But what you're listening to binaurally is actually the Dolby Atmos binaural. It's what you would hear in the renderer. It's what you'd hear on Amazon and Tidal. So it's very definitely Dolby supported in that regards. Is there processing power with the Matrix bundle over other audio interfaces and a new M1? So the only additional power that you get with the Matrix bundle is if you're hosting it on a HDX1 card, and therefore you can make use of the DSP plugins inside of Pro Tools. The Carbon obviously doesn't support greater than 8 channels of output right now, so you can't make use of that as an additional unit. But if that's not important to you, then something along the lines of a UA X16, UA8, will definitely add the processing DSP to the system as well. So it's a case of what is your workflow, and I say that a lot. It's really not meant as a cop-out. It's genuinely, let's talk about your workflow and what's important to you, because that's the real situation there. What are the most popular room correction solutions for home studio setups? Really good question. So again, it varies. So it might be that you're working with a Matrix Studio, in which case it's got the SPQ built into it. You might be working with a Grace Designs M908. That's also got the room correction in it. And then other software solutions like GLM from Genelec give you a lot of flexibility and control in that way. Also the Anibus, many of the high channel count solutions are also adding room correction and speaker tuning to them. So definitely more to come in this this pathway. Seeing some exciting developments that should be announced in the coming weeks and months. Yeah, very exciting to have that. Are you working on better, cheaper ways to stream music on a speaker system? Yes and no. We're always looking to scale out into other platforms, other mechanisms. I'm assuming that what you're actually asking about is from the content suite, and there are some limitations to how that needs to be scaled, needs to be output. And because Atmos is an encoded format that then goes into a decoder, it definitely has some challenges that we need to get around. So we're working on a bunch of that as are our partners, and yeah, we'll hopefully have some good solutions at some point in the future. Certainly going to make my life easier because I'm pretty exhausted of answering the same stuff. Will there be support for Windows-based workstations with the VST plugin for sending panning metadata or drivers to connect workstations to the renderer? It's something we continue to look at. I've seen some rumblings recently that there may be some good stuff happening, and I definitely don't want to speak out of turn on it, but there's some light somewhere in the tunnel, I think, for more flexible workflows. The cool thing about what we're seeing is those workstations implementing Dolby Atmos into their tool sets. And that's what I like about the Pro Tools implementation. That's what I like about the Nuendo implementation. There's a reason that you've chosen to use those workstations, and it's almost certainly not about it supports Dolby Atmos, but by implementing Dolby Atmos tool sets into their workflows, we have the ability for those workstation manufacturers to actually control their destiny with their customers. So I mentioned Pyramix, and the integration of the panning into Pyramix. They're doing some fantastic things. If you want to look at the possibilities of mastering in Dolby Atmos, definitely worth taking a look at what they're doing, and certainly they've got support for other output formats as well. But their flexible busing architecture is pretty superb. That's a reason that people choose to use Pyramix. And with their implementation of Dolby Atmos, it's just a continuing clarification, it's a confirmation that Dolby Atmos is being accepted into the creative community. So I very much expect the workstations to continue to integrate, and frankly, I think they'll end up doing it better than we would. So there we go. I've seen several videos in Mix with the Masters of Dolby, and I see that some have stems and others mix directly in the session with routing. Which is the best option? I'm going to struggle to say best option on those, just because the best option, frankly, is what you have available. And where we're at in the marketplace today is that often the mixers that are tasked with the Atmos mix may not have been the original mixers of the stereo. They may be just receiving stems from that mixer or from the label, who may or may not have received full stems from the artist or from the stereo mixer. So certainly the wider stems that you have available, or the wider multi-track, the better or the more flexible you can be with your Atmos tools. Certainly having a dry vocal is preferable to having a wet vocal in that, because wet vocal was sitting well in the stereo mix, but it may need something different for Atmos. So it's very much a work with what you have. I was on an AES webinar last night when Dave Way shared that he had 8 channels of a master to mix with, and he did what he could. Would he have done something different if he had more? Potentially, but you kind of use what you're given. So that's going to evolve as well. We're going to see more people starting with the sessions, and certainly as Logic works with producers, and we're seeing more of those writing rooms kind of get started, and maybe somebody's creating with Atmos in mind, then I think that we'll see more flexibility for the mixer that may then be tasked with that final immersive Atmos, spatial, whatever you want to call it, mix, and that's really exciting. I think once we get into that, then we'll have a lot more fun, a lot more engagement with the immersive format, and that's going to be really cool to see. When you're using Dolby Audio Bridge as the engine in Pro Tools, how do you get input line mic into the session, since HDX cannot be active at the same time as Dolby Audio Bridge? You can't. It's one of the limitations that we flag pretty extensively, and I'm sure that somebody out there has figured out a way to make it so, But yeah, it definitely is a challenge to success. So if you're working in the Dolby Audio Bridge with the production suite, you're really going to have wanted to record everything down and have it available in your session before you switch over to Dolby Audio Bridge. It's probably the thing that I say most often about that production suite workflow is it's the limitation of the synchronous engine in Pro Tools. It's also in Nuendo, so this is not a dig at Avid. And the only two platforms that I've used that have an asynchronous engine for Dolby Atmos are Logic Pro. Excuse the leaf blower. Logic Pro enables you to have a different audio input than output. The same with Ableton Live. So you can have inputs set to a particular interface and the Dolby Audio Bridge is your output in both of those workstations. That obviously doesn't make use of the integrated renderer in Logic, but it's certainly a pathway that can be successful. So I apologize, Git, but that's the story. Is the binaural renderer in Nuendo the same as in the production suite? No. So binaural is one of those terms that covers a multitude of sins, and for good reasons and bad reasons. But the Dolby Atmos binaural is Dolby's algorithm and all of the goodness that goes on there. The binaural renderer in Nuendo is whatever HRTFs they've chosen to implement in Nuendo. They may end up sounding similar, but the Nuendo at this time is not going to make use of the binaural render mode, so it's not going to make use of off, near, mid, far. It's just going to be a binaural render of the mix as it comes out there. So. Sorry, just trying to understand this question. Would be cool for re-rendering MP4 to have, instead of no video or black video, a video visual representation of what's happening in the mix. Yeah, unfortunately, that would mean you creating the video. If you create an H.264 video of what was happening, then you could, in fact, use the output from version 3.7 and above of the renderer to tie that video into the MP4. But I've not seen anybody do that yet. So maybe be the first. Any more about leveraging Atmos for podcasts? Yeah, so podcasts is a really interesting marketplace. That's all I can describe it as. And what we're seeing is creators valuing the creative possibilities of Dolby Atmos. So even though you're delivering largely to headphones, or maybe into the Dolby Atmos enabled cars now, the podcasters are wanting to create these immersive experiences to set themselves apart. Q-Code actually just won, apparently there's a podcast Oscars, and Matt Yoakum and the team on at Q-Code actually won the award last year for their Dolby Atmos podcasts with Q-Code. So it's a developing market, and one that at the tail end of last year, actually, I should have mentioned, SpiceJet in India actually launched Dolby Atmos in planes and in their in-flight entertainment system, with a focus on music, Bollywood content, and podcasts. So we're seeing adoption of Dolby Atmos very much in the same way that we're seeing across all of the other mechanisms. Now, whether it's a talking head kind of environment or a sort of narrative immersion, storytelling, sort of radio show, for want of a better description, radio play. There are going to be different value propositions to add to that. But one of the things that we continue to see is being able to put users in that space, and we want that, and the creators want to again be able to have different binaural experiences, and maybe have head tracked versus non-head tracked, and various things. So I see an awful lot of parallels between what we were seeing and what I was seeing in VR back in, was that 2015, 2016, and where the podcast world is today. So yeah, definitely worth exploring and having fun with, because it's a story that's yet to be written, I believe. Some questions in here that I definitely can't answer. Okay, I've added left wide and right wide to my 714 setup. How do I send audio/objects exclusively to these two speakers? So one of the things that exists in the various panners is a function called snap mode, and snap mode is in the Pro Tools panner at least denoted by a little dot with two lines coming out of the side of it. That will allow you to place audio directly in a single speaker. So as you pan down the wall, instead of kind of crossfading between the speakers, it allows you just to hit each speaker as you go. So if you were to turn that on and then pull back from the left speaker channel or in the panner, it would at a particular point hit the left wide only speaker, and then regardless of whether you were playing that back on a 714, 514 headphone output, it's going to maintain the spatial location of that, and then get into in the sound field that it's recreating. Yes. So in Logic, you can in fact only export the ADMB wave, which you need to turn into MP4 for artist approval. Yes, that's one of the holes that I saw. Anyway, yes, pull that ADM into the renderer, and export from there is going to be the answer to that. Questions about utilizing Dolby Atmos with video workflow, how to perform encoding and how to preview easily. So the professionalsupport.dolby.com has a number of articles that describe how to mux the video with the audio, and that will be with tools such as FFmpeg, or there's actually a GitHub version of the Dolby Atmos muxer, the MP4 muxer file that you can run those commands on. So the encoding for the Dolby Atmos bitstream, at least in some way, can be performed by the renderer. So it's going to export the MP4 with DD+ jock, 768 is going to be the default for music. I think it's also now the default for video resources as well. But they also have an option for outputting 448 from that muxer, from that encoder that's in the renderer. That bit stream, the DD plus JOC bit stream, or the EC3, is then going to be the thing that you need to mux with that video. That's described on professionalsupport.dolby.com. So go and take a gander at that. Yes, Tom Ammerman has pointed out that Spatial Audio Designer actually offers realistic binaural monitoring for Nuendo. So for those of you not familiar with Spatial Audio Designer, it's a fantastic plugin set that Tom has developed, and does some really cool things. So definitely worth taking a look at and downloading. He's also genius, to be honest. Can you discuss the difference between Apple Spatial and True Binaural? Well, Apple Spatial is True Binaural in many ways. What they're doing is taking the 714, decoding Dolby Atmos over speakers, the DD plus JOC, into a 714 speaker environment in their engine, and their engine is then converting it into the binaural signal that goes to the devices. What it can't make use of is the binaural render modes, but I feel like, you know, creating Dolby Atmos content today that doesn't support binaural render modes is a very short-sighted way of creating Dolby Atmos content, because it's going to continue to evolve into other platforms. And you know, you don't want to find yourself on a SpiceJet airline and not be able to hear the quality of your music in the way that it's designed, because you didn't add binaural render modes. So definitely worth setting. What binaural settings should I use to closely mirror Apple's spatial audio? LCR off, surround channels mid, thanks. First off, if you turn off the binaural settings in your master file, what you're doing is creating stereo of those channels, which isn't really immersive audio in the grandest description of it. So I definitely recommend against setting those LCRs to off, unless there's a creative reason for it. Now, it may be that that's what sounds right for you, or you want that to be the case, fine. But it shouldn't be in an effort to emulate what is happening on spatial audio, because that's totally what's not happening. In the virtualized world, LCR is always going to be pushed further away from you than those left and right channels that you're used to experiencing. So by setting that LCR to off, what you're actually doing is making the content that goes to the other platforms less immersive. It's having absolutely no effect on the Apple rendering, because DD plus JOC does not support those binaural render modes. All of that being said, the closest way to get to it, and this is truly anecdotal, there's no science behind this, is if you were to set all of your binaural render modes to far, then you're going to be getting the most reverb that, or the room model that the Dolby Atmos engine supports. Somewhere between far and mid is where I believe the Apple Spatial virtualizer sounds, I don't have exact values on what that would be, but if you were to set it there and then work your way back and into setting the binaural render modes correctly for what the content is. So if you want the vocal to be more present, set it to near. If you want the the drums to be impactful, set those to near. If you want the pads to be ambient, set those to far. The tool set is there to support your content. And if you like the way it sounds in the binaural render coming out of the renderer, and you like the way it sounds in your speakers, then that's as close as you can get to being truly successful for your content that you're servicing. So definitely, that's what I'd recommend. Just run out of time. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all the great questions. I hope that it was useful to see some flexible workflows, and look forward to seeing you next month when I believe I'll be in Nashville. All right. Have a great day.